The space station was silent except for the hum of the engines that kept it spinning, orbiting a dying planet far from Earth. This place wasn't home to many humans, but it had become a stop for travelers. Aliens from distant galaxies, smugglers, and traders passing through the void. The station's bar was at the farthest edge, the only place where weary travelers could relax, drink, and forget the long journeys. Jake had been on the move for weeks. He was just another human trying to make a living in a world that was far too large and far too strange. After the long flight, his legs ached, his stomach growled, and all he wanted was a drink. He walked through the station's halls, past the heavy doors that led to the bar. With a sigh of relief, he pushed the door open. The bar was dimly lit, a contrast to the harsh white lights of the station's corridors. The air was thick with the smell of alien drinks, strong and pungent, mixing with the quiet murmur of different languages. There were a few scattered figures in the room, mostly aliens. Their features were as strange as the stars outside the window. Humans weren't the only ones who traveled the galaxy. Some of them glanced at Jake with a mixture of curiosity and indifference, but he was used to that. He was used to being an outsider. Jake moved to the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender, a large being with 6 eyes and 3 arms, barely looked at him as he prepared the drink. As the glass slid across the counter, Jake took it, his hand brushing the surface. The cold glass felt good against his hand, a small comfort in this alien place. He sat at a table in the corner trying to relax. But then he saw her. Across the room, sitting alone, was an alien girl who seemed out of place. Her features were delicate, almost human, but not quite. Her skin shimmered with a violet glow, and her eyes were bright golden orbs that seemed to take in everything at once. Small horns like twisted branches sprouted from her head, and her hair shimmered like silver in the dim light. She wore a simple, flowing robe, her hands folded in front of her as she gazed around the room. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. There was something about her that drew him in. Maybe it was her beauty or the way her eyes seemed to see straight through him, but he couldn't look away. It was strange, this sudden pull he felt, but he couldn't deny it. For a moment she caught his gaze. There was no smile, no flirtation, just a soft, curious look. Jake quickly turned his head, feeling a little embarrassed, as if he had been caught staring at something too precious to be seen. But as he sipped his drink, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just begun, something he didn't understand. Minutes passed, but Jake's eyes kept returning to her. The room felt quieter now, almost like it was holding its breath. Finally, as if something had snapped, the alien girl stood up. Her movements were graceful, smooth. She didn't hesitate as she walked across the room, her eyes still fixed on Jake. When she reached his table, Jake's heart raced. He couldn't explain why, but everything about this moment felt important, like it was destined to happen. The alien girl stopped in front of him, her golden eyes studying him, and for a moment there was only silence between them. Then, in a voice that was soft but clear, she spoke. "Is this your first time here?" she asked. Jake blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to speak, let alone talk to him. His mind scrambled for words, but it was like his voice had escaped him. He finally nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Yeah," he managed to say, his voice sounding rough. "I just needed a place to relax." Her gaze softened and a small smile played at the corners of her lips. "It's a strange place, isn't it?" she said, her voice almost melodic. "Not many humans come here." Jake chuckled nervously. "I guess I'm one of the few." She looked at him closely, as if studying every inch of him. "I thought humans were rare here, but you seem different." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure if she meant his appearance or something else. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Finally, he cleared his throat and gave her a tentative smile. "I'm Jake. I guess you could say I'm just passing through." The alien girl nodded slowly, her golden eyes never leaving his face. "I'm Arya." There was something about the way she said her name, quiet, almost as if she was revealing a secret. Jake felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. This wasn't just a casual conversation. This wasn't just a chance meeting. He didn't know why, but he felt like he was meant to meet her, like the stars had aligned to bring him here to this exact moment, to her. Arya looked at him for a moment longer, as if weighing something, before she took a seat across from him. "Tell me, Jake," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "What do you think about the stars?" Jake, unsure of where this conversation was going, smiled. I think they're beautiful. So many of them so far away." Arya's eyes softened, and for the first time since she'd walked into the bar, she looked vulnerable. "Yes, they are beautiful," she whispered, her gaze distant as if lost in thought. Jake couldn't explain it, but something about Arya felt different. Something about her made him want to stay in this moment forever, talking to her. He didn't know why, but he knew he wasn't going to forget this night, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't going to be the only night they spent together. Arya felt something strange, something she couldn't explain. When Jake had smiled, just a simple friendly smile after she'd made a joke about the stars, it hit her like a wave crashing onto an alien shore. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she thought it might explode. She had been trained to control her emotions, to never let anyone get too close. But the warmth in Jake's smile stirred something deep inside her, something she had never been taught to feel. Her people, the Valari, had strict rules. They didn't believe in emotions like love or affection. Those were seen as weaknesses. Every Valari was taught from birth to keep their distance, to focus on logic and strength. Love was a human thing, a dangerous thing. Yet, here she was, standing on the edge of it, not knowing whether she was sinking or flying. She swallowed hard, her golden eyes darting to the floor as she tried to gather herself. Her people had warned her about the humans, about how they could charm you, make you feel things you weren't supposed to feel. They said their emotions were contagious, that once you were caught in them, you were lost. But how could she ignore the way Jake made her feel? How could she ignore this electric pull between them? Arya blinked rapidly, trying to push the feelings aside. She needed to stay focused. She wasn't like the others. She had been trained to resist such weaknesses, to remain above it all. But Jake was different. She glanced at him again, and for a moment he seemed so ordinary. Just a human man, simple in his ways. Yet there was a kindness in his eyes, a softness that seemed to reach out to her without her permission. She had never felt this drawn to anyone. Not like this. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to speak again, her voice a little more strained than before. "You humans, you find beauty in everything, don't you?" she asked, hoping to steer the conversation away from where it was heading. Her mind raced, trying to regain control of her emotions. Jake nodded, unaware of the battle she was facing inside. "Yeah, I guess. It's not that hard when you look at things from the right angle. There's beauty everywhere if you know where to look." The words hit her differently than they should have. To Arya, it wasn't just a simple response. It was a reminder of how different she was from him, how different her species was. The Valari saw beauty in strength, in order, in perfection. Humans, on the other hand, found beauty in chaos, in vulnerability, in connection, and that was exactly what Jake offered her. Connection. A simple conversation. A moment of understanding. Her mind spun with confusion, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest. The more she tried to push away the feeling, the stronger it became. It was like a wild thing, clawing at her from the inside, forcing her to confront a truth she wasn't ready to face. She didn't know what to do with it. Her fingers tingled, and she instinctively reached for her drink, hoping it might calm the storm building inside her. She took a long sip, but it didn't help. Nothing seemed to help. She could still feel his gaze on her, like a weight that made her heart race even faster. His presence was too much, too close, and yet it felt like the only thing that made sense in this moment. Jake leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers with a quiet intensity. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. The question threw her off balance. She was supposed to have control over this situation, over herself, but now she felt lost. The words felt like a lifeline, pulling her closer to something she wasn't ready for. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She wasn't okay. Not at all. Arya's voice faltered, and she cursed herself for showing weakness. But there was no hiding it now. She couldn't push the feelings away. She couldn't pretend she wasn't feeling something that was utterly forbidden. Jake's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Arya could see the warmth in his eyes. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. It was the kind of kindness she had never known from anyone in her entire life. "I don't know what's happening," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never felt like this before." Jake's eyes widened, but he didn't pull away. "You don't have to explain it to me," he said gently. "Sometimes feelings don't need to make sense. They just are." For a long moment, the two of them just stared at each other. The noise of the bar seemed to fade into the background, the lights dimmed. In that quiet space, it was just Jake and Arya. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be before. She wasn't sure if it was a mistake to let him in, but in that moment, all she could think of was the connection between them, the invisible thread that had already tied them together in ways neither of them could understand. But as she gazed at Jake, her heart still racing, Arya knew one thing for certain: she couldn't turn back now. Arya's mind reeled. She had never expected this. As she watched Jake's fingers brush against her skin, a sudden shock of energy coursed through her body, something she had never felt before. It was as if the very fabric of the universe had momentarily aligned, and in that brief second, everything about her life changed. Her hand tingled where Jake had touched it, and she instinctively pulled it back. But the feeling didn't stop. The energy spread up her arm, flowing through her veins in a way she couldn't describe. Wild, unexpected, and dangerously powerful. It felt like a connection being formed that couldn't be broken, even if she wanted to. Her breath caught in her throat as she glanced at her wrist. There, shimmering faintly beneath her skin, was the mark. The ancient symbol of the Valari people that only appeared when a soul bond had been formed. The mark was a symbol of recognition, but it was supposed to take years of courtship, of trust, of shared experiences. It wasn't something that could happen with a casual touch, a random human who was just passing through a bar. Arya's heart pounded in her chest. She had never believed in the myths surrounding this bond. She had dismissed it as nonsense, an old legend to control the younger Valari who were too curious about emotions. But now here she was, standing before a human man, and her wrist glowed with a sign that should have been impossible. "What's happening to me?" Arya whispered to herself, not daring to speak too loudly. She feared Jake might hear the panic in her voice. Jake, completely unaware of the ancient symbol that had just marked her, smiled softly. "Are you all right? You look a little shaken." His words should have comforted her, but instead, they only made the situation feel more surreal. Her eyes were drawn back to the mark. The golden glow was still there, faint but undeniable, as if mocking her with its existence. She had felt the bond the moment Jake had touched her, and she knew it wasn't just a simple accident. The bond was real. She forced a smile, trying to hide the panic that was building inside her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice shaky. Just a little overwhelmed." Jake's smile faded slightly, but he didn't press further. He could tell something was off, but he didn't know what. He just assumed it was because they were strangers, far from their homes, in a strange and unfamiliar place. He had no idea that this was more than just a conversation between two travelers. This was something ancient, something impossible, something beyond their understanding. Arya took a step back, trying to regain her composure, but the mark on her wrist wouldn't go away. It was as if it was now part of her, part of this strange moment she was sharing with Jake. She had to leave. She had to get away before she did something she couldn't take back. But she couldn't move. The bond had already begun to form, and trying to escape it was like trying to escape the pull of gravity. Her people had warned her, warned all Valari women, not to form bonds with outsiders, not with humans. It was a violation of their culture, their beliefs. It was forbidden. Humans were unpredictable, emotional creatures. The Valari had long ago cast them off as unworthy of deeper connections. Their emotions were too wild, their actions too erratic. To bond with one was to risk everything, your status, your place in society, even your safety. But now, as she stood there, staring at Jake, the weight of that warning felt distant, meaningless. The connection between them felt undeniable, pulling at her heart in ways she couldn't explain. Jake's presence was warm, comforting, something she hadn't known she needed until this very moment. It was everything she had been taught to avoid, and yet it was all she wanted now. Jake, sensing her discomfort, stepped closer. His hand, still warm from their previous contact, hovered near her, unsure whether to reach out again. He didn't understand why she seemed so distant now, but something in him told him that he needed to be there for her. "Hey," Jake said softly, his voice low. "It's okay, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, I don't know, I felt like we were connecting." Arya's heart skipped a beat. He felt it too. The thought nearly broke her. How could this be happening? The Valari were supposed to be stronger than this. They were supposed to control their feelings, their desires, but Jake, this human, this simple man, had broken through her defenses in a single touch. I shouldn't be here," Arya said, almost to herself. "I don't belong here. I need to go." Before Jake could say anything else, Arya turned abruptly, her footsteps quick and panicked. She moved toward the door, the need to escape overwhelming her. She couldn't stay, not when the mark on her wrist was glowing, when the bond had already begun to form. She was breaking every rule, every law of her people. She couldn't let herself fall any deeper. But as she reached the door, she hesitated. Her fingers brushed the handle, but she didn't open it. Her heart was torn in two, one side wanting to run, the other side desperate to stay. The glowing mark on her wrist pulsed again, a reminder of what she couldn't ignore. Jake's voice called out to her softly, as if he understood her pain. "Arya, it's not too late to talk." The weight of his words struck her like a lightning bolt. She closed her eyes, her heart racing. Could she really turn away from this? Could she ignore this feeling, this pull that felt so real, so right? For the first time in her life, Arya wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. Arya's mind was in chaos as she walked beside Jake, her heart and her thoughts racing at the same time. The space station's cold, metallic corridors stretched out in front of them, and for the first time, they felt like a prison, not just a place to pass through. The weight of her glowing wrist felt like it had tripled in the short time they had spent together. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. It was all supposed to be simple, just a casual conversation, a chance to unwind after a long journey. But as they left the bar, the pull between them grew stronger with each step. And now, as the cold space station air brushed against her face, she felt more alive than she ever had in her entire existence. But it wasn't just the air that made her feel alive. It was the human beside her, the human whose touch had marked her forever. Jake, oblivious to the ancient bond forming between them, kept glancing at her, his eyes soft but filled with curiosity. He wasn't used to this, the quiet, unspoken tension between them, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something bigger than either of them could comprehend. Arya had always been different from the other aliens he had met. There was something unspoken about her, something that drew him in, like gravity. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him. It was like she was trying to hide something, but he could see the struggle in her eyes. "Hey," Jake said, his voice low and casual, but there was a hint of concern in his tone. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been a little distant." Arya stopped in her tracks and turned to face him, her golden eyes meeting his with a depth he hadn't seen before. It was like she was trying to decide something, whether to tell him the truth or keep running from it. And in that moment, Jake realized he had no idea what he was stepping into, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her go now. Whatever this was between them, it felt too important to ignore. "I'm not okay," Arya whispered, almost as if speaking the words to herself. I've never felt like this before, and I don't know what to do about it." Jake frowned, his confusion deepening. "What do you mean? What's going on, Arya?" Arya felt the weight of her decision press down on her like 1,000 suns. The ancient teachings of her people screamed in her mind. Never form a bond with a human. Never. Let them in. They are too wild, too chaotic. You are Valari. You are meant for strength, not weakness. But Jake wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to control her, to push her into something she didn't want. He simply was. And that in itself was a force she hadn't learned to deal with. "Jake," she said softly, taking a step back. "I can't be what you think I am." Jake looked puzzled. "What do you mean? I'm just trying to understand. I'm not judging you." She felt a brief flicker of hope. Was it possible? Could he truly see her without judgment, without expectation? In a world where her every action was scrutinized, where the very core of her existence had been designed for logic and restraint, Jake's simple acceptance felt like a refuge. But at the same time, it felt like a trap. She turned her gaze upward, her eyes tracing the stars scattered across the endless void of space. The night sky above them seemed vast and endless, stretching far beyond the station, beyond everything she had ever known. And as she stood there, her mind swirled with the weight of a decision she had never thought she would face. She could feel the pull of the stars as if they were calling her to something she couldn't ignore. The decision was simple in theory, but so incredibly complicated in practice. She could walk away. She could keep running from the emotions that were threatening to break her apart. She could ignore the bond and the connection forming between them, erase the mark on her wrist, and return to her life of control and logic. But as her gaze fell back to Jake, standing just a few feet away, she knew she couldn't walk away. The pull of the connection was too strong. "You've already changed everything," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how, but you've made me question everything I've been taught, everything I've believed." Jake's brow furrowed, his heart racing as he tried to process her words. "What are you saying, Arya? What's happening?" Arya didn't answer at first. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the weight of the decision still pressing on her chest. "What I'm saying is that I can't go back to the way things were, not after tonight, not after meeting you." Jake stepped closer, his concern turning into something more, something stronger, more personal. "You don't have to go back. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." Arya's heart skipped a beat. His words, simple yet powerful, were like a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time, she felt like someone saw her as more than just a symbol of her people, more than just a part of an ancient legacy. She felt like a person, like someone who could choose her own path. And in that moment, beneath the vastness of the stars, she made her choice. "I don't know where this will lead," she said, her voice steady now, though her heart still raced. "But I'm not walking away from you, not anymore." Jake smiled, the warmth of his expression lighting up the cold, dark space around them. "Then let's figure it out together." As Arya stood there, feeling the weight of her decision settle inside her, she knew that everything had changed. The universe, with its endless stars and infinite possibilities, seemed to stretch out before her like a new beginning. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone in it. The bond had been formed, and together they would face whatever came next. The quiet hum of the space station surrounded them as Jake and Arya stood side by side, facing the view of the distant stars through the observation window. The silence between them felt strange, but not uncomfortable. It was as if the universe itself had paused, waiting for something important to unfold. Jake was standing close to her, yet he didn't move. He didn't touch her, but he didn't pull away either. He was simply there, steady and present, and that presence was enough. Arya's mind was a whirlwind, filled with 100 thoughts she couldn't untangle. The glowing mark on her wrist burned against her skin, a constant reminder of the bond that had been formed in an instant. It was as if everything she had ever known had been shattered, replaced with something unexplainable, something frightening and thrilling at the same time. She had been raised to believe that such bonds were impossible, unnatural, and yet here she was, feeling the truth of it with every beat of her heart. She glanced at Jake, his face reflected in the window, his eyes distant as he looked out at the stars. The way he stood so still, so confident, made Arya's heart race. She felt drawn to him, not just by the bond but by the simple warmth of his being. He didn't ask for anything from her. He didn't want to control her. All he wanted was to understand. It was a kindness she had never experienced, and it was tearing her apart. Arya swallowed hard, her throat tight with unspoken words. She had kept so many things hidden for so long, things she had been taught to bury deep inside. But now, in the presence of this human, the walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble. She couldn't keep hiding from what was happening between them. She couldn't ignore the pull of the bond any longer. Her fingers, almost without her permission, reached out and brushed against Jake's hand. The touch was light, tentative, but the moment their skin met, something inside her snapped. The energy between them flared, igniting every nerve, every sense. It wasn't just the bond anymore. It was something more, a deep, quiet yearning that had been growing inside her since the moment they had first spoken. Jake turned to her, his eyes searching hers, waiting for her to say something, anything. But Arya's voice seemed to have left her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had never been good at sharing her emotions. She had never been allowed to. But in the silence between them, it was clear that he was waiting for her to speak, to tell him the truth. Arya closed her eyes, gathering her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, the weight of the universe itself, and the bond that had tied her to this human in ways she couldn't explain. She had to tell him. There was no turning back now. I don't know what this is, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers still lingered on his hand, and she felt a tremor run through her. But I can't deny it. I feel it. The pull, the connection between us, it's real. Jake's expression softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. He just stood there, holding her gaze, as if he were trying to understand everything she was feeling. Arya could see the confusion in his eyes, but also something else, a quiet acceptance, as if he had known all along that something bigger was happening. I've never believed in stuff like this, she continued, her voice shaky. But when I touched you, when we spoke, something changed. And I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I've known you for a lifetime, even though I just met you. Jake gently took her hand in his fingers brushing over the mark on her wrist, the glowing symbol that had bound them together. His touch was warm and steady, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had started, Arya felt a sense of peace. She didn't feel like she was fighting against something she didn't understand. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. I don't need you to explain everything, Jake said softly, his voice calm, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't need all the answers right now. I just need to know that you're here with me, that you want this too. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of something deeper, something she hadn't known she needed until now. Arya had been taught to never show weakness, to never reveal her heart, but in that moment she felt safe with Jake. She felt like she didn't have to hide anymore. I want this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I want you. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and as soon as they did, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to fight the bond. It was real, and it was hers to accept. Jake smiled, the warmth in his eyes deepening. Then we'll figure it out together. Arya couldn't help but smile in return. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of belonging. She wasn't just a Valari anymore. She wasn't just a part of a race that had been taught to control its emotions. She was Arya, a being with a heart capable of connection. And right now, That connection was with Jake. As they stood there, hand in hand, the stars outside the window shimmered brightly, as if the universe itself were blessing this moment, this bond between them. Arya didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. She was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, with Jake by her side. The sound of the alarm sliced through the quiet night air, breaking the fragile peace between Arya and Jake. It was the kind of noise that made the blood run cold, the kind of noise that meant danger was close. Too close. Arya's heart began to race, the sensation of fear creeping up her spine. She had heard those alarms before, on her home planet, in the darkened halls of her family's palace. They were the sound of pursuit, the sound of someone who had gone against the rules, the sound of everything she had worked to avoid. Her grip tightened on Jake's hand, and for a split second, she felt something even stronger than the fear pulsing in her chest. Defiance. "What's happening?" Jake asked, his voice filled with concern, but there was no time for explanation. She could see the confusion in his eyes, but she couldn't stop to explain the details. Not now. Arya's mind raced as she scanned the room, the walls closing in. Her eyes flicked toward the door, knowing that the guards would be coming through it soon. They would drag her away. They would bring her back to the Valari homeworld, where she would be punished for the one thing she could never take back: her bond with Jake. Her people had always valued strength over all else. Emotions were seen as weakness, and love was the greatest weakness of all. To form a bond with a human, especially this quickly, was unheard of. It was a violation of everything her people stood for. Her family would never accept it. They would see it as a threat to their power, to their culture, and Arya knew that if they found out what had happened between her and Jake, she would be condemned. Her place in the Valari hierarchy would be gone, and her life as she knew it would be over. But the pull she felt toward Jake, the bond she could no longer ignore, was stronger than any tradition, any law. It was undeniable. It was real. "I have to go," Arya said quickly, her voice strained. She pulled away from Jake, but her fingers lingered for just a moment, reluctant to leave the warmth of his touch. But as she turned toward the door, her legs felt heavy. She knew what was coming. "No." Jake's voice was firm, his hand reaching for hers. "I'm not letting you go." Arya's heart raced, her mind torn between the fear of the approaching guards and the strange sense of safety she felt with Jake. He didn't know the full weight of what was happening, but he wasn't backing away. He wasn't afraid of her, of the bond, of the consequences. He was standing by her, and for a moment it felt like nothing else mattered. "We can't outrun them," Arya said, her voice trembling. "They're coming for me, Jake. They won't stop until they have me." Jake's face softened, but his resolve only grew stronger. He stepped forward, taking her hand in both of his. "Then we won't outrun them. We'll face them together. I don't care who they are or what they want. You're not alone." His words were simple, but they hit Arya like a shockwave. She had spent her entire life running, hiding, pretending that emotions didn't matter, that she could be the perfect Valari princess. But now, with Jake standing before her, his eyes full of determination and care, she realized how far from that life she truly wanted to be. The alarms grew louder, and a flash of red light from the hallway illuminated the door, signaling that the guards were closing in. Arya's mind raced. She could run. She could escape again, vanish into the night, and live the rest of her life in exile. But she wouldn't be running alone. Jake had already made his choice, and so had she. "Stay with me," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he knew this moment would change everything. "I won't let them take you. We can figure this out. We'll find a way." Arya's breath hitched in her throat. She had never imagined a human, someone so far from her world, would be the one to fight for her. She had never imagined someone would be willing to risk everything just to stand by her side. She looked into Jake's eyes and saw nothing but honesty, nothing but a fierce desire to protect her, to be with her. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Jake smiled, a small but determined smile, Then we fight. The doors to the hallway burst open just as they reached the center of the room. Arya's heart skipped a beat as the first guard stepped. Through the doorway, a tall, armored Valari soldier with cold, calculating eyes. He barely glanced at Jake, his attention fixed solely on Arya. "Step aside, human," the guard barked. "This doesn't concern you." Jake didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his hand still firmly holding Arya's. "It does now," he said, his voice steady. The guard narrowed his eyes, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "You do not understand what you are facing. Step aside or we will have to take more drastic measures." Arya could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The Valari were not known for their mercy, and this guard had no reason to spare them. But Jake didn't back down. He didn't hesitate. "I'm not afraid of you," Jake said, his voice unwavering. "I'm not leaving without her, and I'm not letting you take her anywhere." The room fell silent. The guard's gaze flicked to Arya, then back to Jake. For a moment, nothing moved. The tension was unbearable. Then, without warning, the guard stepped forward. His hand moved quickly toward his weapon, but before he could make contact, Arya did something she had never done before. She stepped in front of Jake, blocking his path. "This is my choice," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "And I'm choosing to be with him." The guard's expression shifted. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something Arya had never seen before. But she didn't wait for him to react. The decision had already been made. They weren't going to be taken without a fight. Not anymore. The world outside the window was a blur of stars, nebulae, and distant suns, but Arya couldn't tear her eyes away from Jake, standing beside her. The moments after their escape had been a whirlwind, running through the service corridors, the sound of the Valari guards' heavy boots chasing them, the tension of every footstep that could have been their last. But now, in the quiet of the ship's bridge, everything had changed. They had made it. They were free. For now. The ship hummed steadily beneath them as it hurtled through space, its engines roaring to life. Arya's breath was steady, but her mind raced. They had done what she once thought was impossible. They had outsmarted the Valari. And yet, she couldn't ignore the dark weight in her chest, the feeling that the battle was far from over. Jake looked at her, his gaze soft, but with a hint of uncertainty. "Are you all right?" His voice was filled with concern. The question, hanging in the air. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. He had just watched Arya step into the unknown, making a choice that would change her life forever. And in some ways, his too. Arya turned to him, her golden eyes catching the dim starlight, and a soft smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It wasn't the smile of a princess or a prisoner. It was the smile of a woman who had made a choice to live her life on her own terms, not dictated by tradition or by her family's rules. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said quietly, her voice steady. "This is the first time I'm not running away from something. I'm running toward something." Jake's hand found hers, a simple gesture, but one that felt more powerful than anything she had ever known. "We're in this together, Arya. Whatever happens next, we'll face it side by side." Her heart fluttered at his words. In all the years of being trained, controlled, and guided by her people's laws, she had never heard anything like that. She had never been told that she could choose for herself, that she could choose her own destiny. But now, standing in the vast emptiness of space with Jake beside her, it felt like the universe was opening up in ways she had never imagined. It wasn't just the stars that were stretching out before her, it was the future. She closed her eyes for a moment, her breath shallow. The faint pulse of the ship's systems felt like the heartbeat of the universe itself. It had taken everything to get here: the courage to break away from her family's expectations, the bravery to defy everything she had ever been taught. But now, it felt like a new beginning. The sound of a door opening behind them broke the silence. A crew member, a grizzled human man with short-cropped hair, stepped onto the bridge, his eyes scanning the instruments before he spoke. "We're clear, Captain. No sign of pursuit. For now." Arya's heart skipped a beat at the title, Captain. She had never thought of herself that way. She was a fugitive, a runaway. How could she be a captain of anything? But in that moment she realized something. She had taken control. She had stepped into the unknown. She was in charge of her own fate now. Jake turned toward the crew member, nodding. Good. Let's keep moving. We've got a long journey ahead. As the crew member left the bridge, Arya turned back to Jake, her eyes full of determination. Where do we go from here? Jake smiled, his eyes bright with excitement. Wherever we want. The galaxy's a big place. We can find our own way. Arya let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. The weight of her old life, the expectations, the rules, the endless traditions, felt like it had lifted from her shoulders. The universe was no longer something she had to fear. It was something she could explore, something she could shape. For the first time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, wondering when the next danger would come. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was choosing to move forward to discover a future of her own making. And with Jake by her side, she knew there was nothing they couldn't face. The ship's engines hummed again, a steady pulse that mirrored the rhythm of her heart. They were free and they were ready for whatever came next. Let's go, Arya said, her voice steady and full of resolve. Jake gave her a nod, his hand still firmly gripping hers, and together, they turned toward the unknown. The galaxy stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time in her life, Arya felt ready to meet it, ready